All right, Prue, we're live.
Okay. Oh, can I share my screen, Prue?
Okay, just turn it to 85. Sorry, Prue?
Can I share my screen?
Oh, yes. I sorry if I didn't allow that yet.
That's okay.
Share. Allow. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janavalabha Girivardhari Gopi Janavalabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Anjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Okay. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayat. Oh, it's the wrong one. Going back one. Okay, Prabhu, so we're here at 121, and there's only one sentence of purport. Should I go to the next one too, or should I just stick with
Yeah,
this one?
you just go with the flow. Yeah,
Okay.
you can go on, Prue. It's okay.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. Okay. Vyasuvacha iti samprashta samhrishto vipranam roma harshini prati puja vachastesham pravaktam upachakrame. Ugrashrava Sutta Goswami, the son of Rama Harshan, being fully satisfied by the perfect questions of the Brahmanas, thanked them and thus attempted to reply. Purport: the sages of Naimisharanya asked Sutta Goswami 6 questions, and so he is answering them one by one. So this is so cool. I'll just say really quick about how a lot of times when I'm trying to explain to people how this isn't some other religion that like is competing with the other religions, but this is actually just the essence of all religion presented in a very specific and detailed way. So the way that I'll kind of convey that is that when you look at who these different great teachers who compiled these great texts were speaking to, you could see a wide array of, you could say, levels of development, spiritually, mentally, etc. So, for example, when Jesus Christ was speaking to people, he had to tell them, "Thou shalt not kill," because he was dealing with people who were killing each other. And then what did the people do he told that to? What did his disciples do? Who he told they killed him. So how much could he really say to that level of person? No offense to them, of course, but he was limited in terms of what he could convey, how deep he could go. Similar to Muhammad. Muhammad had to tell people, don't be, sexually intimate with your mother because that was what was going on at the time. But here we're seeing these great sages who came from all over the world solely for the purpose of performing sacrifice, meaning sacrificing their own pleasure, their own happiness, their own immediate gratification for the sake of people who they would never meet in their entire lives. They knew that after this lifetime, they were most likely going to become liberated, go back to the spiritual realm, and so forth. But they came out of the goodness of their heart because they were so spiritually advanced, because they knew already, they fully realized already that real happiness comes from sacrificing my own pleasure for the sake of something greater. That they came to this forest and didn't eat, didn't sleep, just heard and engaged in this beautiful um, exchange with somebody else who is already perfect as well, for the sake of the benefit of the people who would come after them. So, for that reason, Sutta Goswami was able to go very deep into the essence of all spiritual philosophy. So, it's not that Krishna consciousness is some kind of other rope end to add to the mix of all these other loose rope ends, but it's actually the one that ties them all together because it gives the full picture so that we could really go very deep and see the universe around us in a complete way, in a way that's actually beneficial for ourselves and for the entire world. So this is a very exciting chapter. It's probably my favorite chapter in the whole Bhagavatam, and I think a lot of other people would agree because that essence that we're discussing, that essence of all religion, of all spiritual philosophy, of all perfection, is being very clearly and satisfyingly spoken of here in these next, I believe, 34 verses or so. And so it's a very exciting chapter, and I'm really glad we could dive into it together. And I'm excited for you guys to hear it deeply. So, here, after those questions by the sages about how one could attain perfection, about how one could manage in Kali Yuga where things are so dark and degraded, and in and about where the light would come from in such a dark age, especially now that Krishna had just departed. And so now Sutta Goswami is going to reply. He says, Yam pravajantam anupetam apeta krityam dvaipayano vridaha katada ajuhava putreti tanmayataya tadavo bhinedus tam sarva bhuta hridayam munyamanatosmi. So this is very telling that the first thing he says when he replies is actually a glorification of his spiritual master, of Shukadev Goswami. So he's not just going to go right into, well, this is what I think and this is my realization. He first says, let me offer my respectful obeisances unto that great sage, Shukadev Goswami, who can enter the hearts of all. When he went away to take up the renounced order of life, sannyas, leaving home without undergoing reformation by the sacred thread or the ceremonies observed by the higher castes, his father Vyasadeva, fearing separation from him, cried out, O my son, indeed only the trees, which were absorbed in the same feelings of separation, echoed in response to the bereaved father. So again, this idea of like this is the beginning of the Bhagavatam, right? Which is a massive text. And what they wanted, what Shukadev Goswami, Sutta Goswami, what they want to do first is establish the authority of the Bhagavatam. So harping on this point that we just talked about, that this is being spoken by and spoken to people who are on a very high spiritual level. Shukadev Goswami, from the day he was born, wanted absolutely nothing to do with the material world. This is Sutta Goswami, the speaker's spiritual master. He came out of the womb and went straight to the forest, literally. He had no feelings of attachment to his mother, to his father, to his family, to his high parentage, his high culture that he came from. That's what's being said here. It says he left home without undergoing reformation by the sacred thread, which means, at that time, especially Brahmanas, those who were the kind of priestly class or order were considered the highest. They received the most respect. They were worshipped and so forth. And Sukadev Goswami immediately was like, yeah, I'm not into any of that. I'm just going to go to the forest. I don't want anyone to worship me or or distract me. Basically, I don't want any distractions from what I understand, what I realized to be the ultimate goal of life, which is spiritual realization, Krishna consciousness. So he left home, did not observe any ceremonies that would be observed, and even his father, Vyasadeva, who is called a Shaktavesh avatar, which means that he's especially empowered by divinity, by God, to perform a specific task for the welfare of all. Even he was feeling this separation from him, from this great soul whom he had this affection for, not in a selfish way, but because he knew how special he was. So even he cried out, "Oh, my son!" But alas, only the trees, which were absorbed in the same feelings of separation from this great soul who would speak this text, the Bhagavatam, only they echoed in response to the aggrieved father. So again, it's relaying this point that the people who are speaking and hearing this beautiful Bhagavatam are on this very high level, and so they're not going to give us anything that's not pure, basically, that's going to lead us astray from that ultimate goal of complete spiritual realization, from that same goal that was detailed by great sages and great personalities like Jesus Christ, like Buddha, etc. There's nothing in the Bhagavatam that's going to lead us astray from that. It's completely pure. So here's the purport by Srila Prabhupada. The institution of Varna and Ashrama prescribes many regulative duties to be observed by its followers. Such duties enjoin that a candidate willing to study the Vedas must approach a bona fide spiritual master and request acceptance as his disciple. The sacred thread is a sign of those who are competent to study the Vedas from the Acharya, or the bona fide spiritual master. Sri Shukadev Goswami did not undergo such purificatory ceremonies because he was a liberated soul from his very birth. Generally, a man is born as an ordinary being, and by the purificatory process he is born for the second time. When he sees a new light and seeks direction for spiritual progress, he approaches a spiritual master for instruction in the Vedas. The spiritual master accepts only the sincere inquirer as his disciple and gives him the sacred thread. In this way, a man becomes twice born, or a Dvija. After qualifying as a Dvija, one may study the Vedas, and after becoming well versed in the Vedas, one becomes a Vipra. A Vipra, or a qualified Brahmana, thus realizes the Absolute and makes further progress in spiritual life until he reaches the Vaishnav stage. The Vaishnav stage is the postgraduate status of a Brahmana. A progressive Brahmana must necessarily become a Vaishnav, for a Vaishnav is a self-realized, learned Brahmana. So Prabhupada here is going deep into this concept of this different social and spiritual orders of life. And so the Vedas, which are universally accepted as the oldest compilation of spiritual and even material philosophy in existence, um, enjoin that there are different uh, orders of life that one has a natural attraction towards. So somebody might be more into studying and might be more, let's say, um, pensive. So they may be attracted towards stuff like spiritual philosophy and meditation naturally. And these are the kinds of people that are by nature um, inclined towards Krishna consciousness, towards spiritual philosophy. But it's not that that is necessarily an exclusive category. What Prabhupada is describing here is that anybody who is sincere, as it's said here, anyone who is a sincere inquirer towards spiritual life, which could be somebody who has any kind of inclination, can approach a bona fide spiritual master, somebody who has absorbed himself in these instructions and has adopted a lifestyle that's conducive to spiritual progress and develop these favorable qualities that help one on the spiritual path, the qualities of a brahmana, as is being described here, where one becomes inclined towards studying the Vedas, studying texts like this, Bhagavatam, the Bhagavad Gita, adopts a certain lifestyle that's conducive to that, and develops a mentality and a general disposition of sattva gun, where they are calm and pensive and controlled in their dealings and in their mind, and as a result, they could very easily make progress on the path of spiritual life. So somebody who adopts that kind of mentality and makes Krishna the main thing in their life, basically. Accepts things that are favorable, rejects things that are unfavorable to their development of spiritual life, of Krishna consciousness. They reach the Vaishnav stage. Vaishnav means that they are dedicated to Krishna. They feel themselves to be a loving servant of divinity, of Krishna. They have become mostly convinced, you could say, that the only thing that'll bring them happiness is the relationship with God, the relationship with the divine. So that is the Vaishnav stage that anybody can attain, regardless of their swabhav, it's called in Sanskrit, of their innate nature. Anybody by sincere inquiry and approaching somebody who is a bona fide spiritual master can attain that stage, that exalted stage of being a loving servant of God, or a Vaishnav. The Vaishnav stage is a postgraduate status of a Brahmana. A progressive Brahmana must necessarily become a Vaishnav, for a Vaishnav is a self-realized, learned Brahmana. Self-realized means you understand your nature. It's not some artificial imposition that you're a servant of God or that you're that your nature is to love God, but it's just who you are. So that's what we're all striving towards. That's the natural condition of the living entity. Srila Shukadev Goswami was a Vaishnav from the beginning. Therefore, there was no need for him to undergo all the processes of the Varnashram institution. Ultimately, the aim of Varnashram Dharma is to turn a crude man into a pure devotee of the Lord, or a Vaishnav. Anyone, therefore, who becomes a Vaishnav, accepted by the first-class Vaishnav, or Uttama Adhikari Vaishnav, is already considered a Brahmana, regardless of his birth or past deeds. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu accepted this principle and recognized Srila Haridas Thakur as the Acharya of the holy name. So this is a great point. This is a really cool point that I really love and that really convinced me actually about the Krishna consciousness philosophy. So I'll say it again real quick. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who's the great saint and divine personality who came 500 years ago to spread love for God, love for divinity via kirtan, via the beautiful chanting and dancing of these spiritual names, mantra meditation, accepted this principle that a Vaishnav is already considered a Brahmana, regardless of birth. So he accepted this principle and recognized Srila Haridas Thakur as the Acharya, or the great teacher, the preeminent teacher whom everyone else can look towards for what to do. So he accepted Haridas Thakur as the Acharya of the holy name, although Haridas Thakur appeared in a Mohammedan family. So mind you, this was at a time when Muslims were considered untouchable by the general class of people following the Vedas, or at least, in name, perhaps. In general, Mohammedan Muslims were considered to be very low class because they ate meat and because they had a certain lifestyle that was antithetical towards the Vedic lifestyle, um, which is accepted as the way in which we can develop more spiritual progress. So, despite the fact that Haridas Thakur was born in a Muslim family, still this great eminent sage and saint, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, accepted him as the great teacher. So there was a very deep uh, statement made in that it doesn't matter where you're from, doesn't matter what kind of family you're born into, it doesn't matter how much money they have, it doesn't matter if you're a Muslim or a Christian or whatever you might be, regardless of who you think you are, or who you temporarily are in this lifetime. In reality, you're actually a pure servant. You're actually a pure spirit soul. And you have just as great and as legitimate an opportunity to become perfect, to become a great teacher, if that's what you're called to do, as somebody who's born in some, Brahmana Vedic family. There's absolutely no difference. Any difference that's there is absolutely temporary and ultimately transient. It's not real. So, regardless of where we come from, who we are, what our bad habits are, whatever it might be, anybody, if they are a sincere inquirer, if they're sincere and humble, and approach somebody who's bona fide in giving instruction, can become a great acharya. And not necessarily that you become, the spiritual master of the whole world, you become some big famous guru or whatever, but you become a perfected being who is a walking holy place in the sense that anybody who comes near you will become inspired and will become purified, will become enthusiastic to take up spiritual life in a more serious way. There's nothing barring anyone from becoming that. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu emphasized that, and that's what the verses is, or rather the purport is kind of saying, that regardless of whether one's born in a high family, anybody can become perfect in this lifetime. In conclusion, Srila Shukadev Goswami was born a Vaishnav, and therefore Brahmanism was included in him. He did not have to undergo any ceremonies. Any low-born person, be he a Kirata, Huna, Andhra, Pulinda, Pulkasha, Abhira, Shamba, Yavana, Kas, or even lower, can be delivered to the highest transcendental position by the mercy of the Vaishnavas. Srila Shukadev Goswami was the spiritual master of Sri Suta Goswami, who therefore offers his respectful obeisances unto Srila Shukadev Goswami before he begins his answers to the questions of the sages at Naimisharanya. So, one last point I wanted to go over that I thought was really cool is this idea of the Uttama Adhikari. Anyone, therefore, Prabhupada says here, who becomes a Vaishnav accepted by the first class Vaishnav or Uttama Adhikari Vaishnav is already considered a Brahmana regardless of his birth or past deeds. So you'll see this come up throughout Prabhupada's books and throughout the works of the previous acharyas. This idea of there being different classes of devotees, of spiritual practitioners. And the way that those different classes are divided, I find is very satisfying, actually. Because for me personally, like as soon as you hear the idea of like there's different classes and this class is above that class and you treat this class like that and that class like this, there could be a sense of like, ooh, like, and I don't know how I feel about that. Because in one sense, you feel like we're all equal and we should all be treated with the same amount of respect and be dealt with accordingly. But I'll say that that is the general modus operandi, yes. Krishna says in the 12th chapter of Bhagavad Gita that we should be a kind friend to all living entities. We treat everybody with respect. We don't expect any respect for ourselves, but still there must be a sense of understanding of different levels of devotees, and we should interact with them in specific ways. Just like we understand that the soul in the tiger is the same as my soul. It's the same spiritual being who is an eternal lover of divinity, of God, of Krishna. But I'm not going to go and hang out with the tiger in the cage because that could end up pretty bad for me. So in the same way, we have to be practical. We have to make practical considerations for the sake of our own spiritual development and especially our spiritual protection. So in the Nectar of Instruction, we find this fantastic little verse where it says, Krishneti yasya giritam manasadriyeta dikshasti chetpanati bhischa bhajantamisham shushu shaya bhajana vigya mananya manya nindari shunyam hidamipsita sangha labdhya. So it says, one should mentally honor the devotee who chants the holy name of Lord Krishna. So that means anybody who chants the name of God, anybody who's a who's spiritually serious, we should mentally honor them, meaning not just that we offer them respect, we offer everybody respect, but we should actually take a moment in our mind to feel a sense of reverence towards them. It's a beautiful thing. So that's the lowest level. That's the so-called third class, which is still honorable. Second class, one should offer humble obeisances, means one should actually demonstratively offer their respects to the devotee who has undergone spiritual initiation and is worshiping the deity, which means that one is not just inclined towards spiritual life, but one has said, this is my main thing. I'm gonna make this my modus operandi in life. That everything I do is going to be, it's going to have bumpers on it. I'm not going to go too far this way or too far that way. I have a very clear goal in my life, and I'm now going to take a vow to give up anything that is not ultimately conducive to me reaching that ultimate goal of spiritual perfection. And I'm going to accept certain things into my life, adopt a certain lifestyle that, although sometimes may be a little bit annoying or sometimes may feel a little bit difficult, I'm going to adopt certain things into my life that will help me develop that spiritual love and spiritual perfection. So, to somebody like that, we should actually physically offer our respects. We offer even a little bit more honor, a little bit more respect. And we accept them as somebody that we can learn from and associate with. Step three, one should associate with and faithfully serve that pure devotee who has advanced in undeviated devotional service, and this is my favorite part, and whose heart is completely devoid of the propensity to criticize others. So it's a great point that actually, in the highest level of spiritual realization, you won't find somebody who's cold, who's constantly unnecessarily criticizing others. You'll find somebody in this first class of devotee whose heart is so soft, is so supple with love for God, with love for Krishna, that they no longer have that propensity to put other people down. Why? Because that propensity is born of this root cause of our material existence, which is this sense of competition. Competition with somebody who we perceive as perhaps being higher up than us, competition with divinity, with God. The whole reason we're in the material world is because we want to put ourselves at the top. And so that subtle root is there in the heart of anybody practically who's still in the material world, and it manifests in different ways. But one of the most gross ways that you'll see it manifest is in this propensity to criticize others. So somebody who has attained complete perfection in spiritual life, they have given up that desire to compete with others, to compete with God, and have fully embraced their actual nature as a loving servant of divinity. They've tasted the sweetness of loving service, and they actually maintain a sort of fear, a sense of anxiety in losing that connection, that intimate connection that they've gained with divinity. They don't want to do anything that will throw that off or that will hamper that eternal, ongoing, loving exchange back and forth with divinity that they've come to cultivate. And so, out of a sense of fear and also out of a sense of love for divinity and for everybody, because everyone's a part of God, they no longer have that tendency to criticize others. So, for somebody like that, we should accept them as a guru. We should serve them. We should associate with them. We should try to get a little taste of that love that they're experiencing themselves by way of service to them and by putting ourselves in a position where that mercy, that love that they're experiencing can naturally flow downwards towards us so that we could be inspired. So we'll see that as a major theme throughout the Bhagavatam as we go. This idea of there being different adhikaris. The third class being the Kanishta adhikari, second class being Madhyam adhikari, and first class being the Uttam adhikari. And so we approach each of them in a slightly different way according to what's ultimately most beneficial for ourselves and our spiritual development. But we offer respect to everybody, even if somebody is a uh, a uh, a person who has no interest in spiritual life, even if someone's currently in the body of a little ant or a mosquito, still we offer all respects and all love because Krishna says that one who is dear to him is a kind friend to all living entities. And the best way we could offer respect and care for those around us is to share the message that we're reading here in the Bhagavatam. Krishna says also in the 18th chapter that nobody is more dear to him than one who explains this Param Guhyam, this supreme secret, to others. Why? Because people are bereft of this sweetness, they're bereft of this love that is being expressed here in the Bhagavatam. And as a result, they're suffering greatly. They're searching for it in all the wrong places. They are absorbed in their phones. Has anyone ever seen Harry Potter with the Dementors? Yeah, where they kind of suck your life out of your face like that. That's how I feel like when I'm sitting on the bus or on the train, you see people just on their phone like that. With just their life force just getting sucked out of it. Why? Because they're looking for that love. They're scrolling, scrolling. Will this be the one? Will this be the one that gives me that love, that satisfaction that I'm looking for? And it just never comes. It's the classic carrot that is in front of the face, but that they never actually taste. So for that reason, we should offer the utmost love and respect to everybody and everyone by sharing this beautiful message of the Bhagavatam that's about to be spoken by Sutta to the sages. So we'll stop here about 9 minutes. If there are any comments or reflections, questions, we'd love to hear, guys.
Well, I have something. I mean, I was thinking about, and please don't think this is me playing devil's advocate. This is an actual question, okay? So, there was some discussion after reading the purport, second purport, about, the people in the field of ideas, or, Brahmins in the, Vedic language, they are naturally inclined to study philosophy, whether material or spiritual, and then so progressive Brahmin naturally becomes a Vaishnava, right? So that makes sense, right? Someone who's interested in philosophy and then reads Bhagavatam will become a Vaishnava. Great. I'm wondering about, we make it really specific, like we've got these 5 potent processes of bhakti out of 64 that are, and reading Srimad Bhagavatam is one of them, that are, really glorified and exalted in our tradition. And I think the implication here is like, so people who have a Brahmana or field of ideas nature, they like to read philosophy, so that probably means that there are other people that are not inclined toward philosophy at all. And are they just kind of not fully out of luck, but is it just going to be harder for them to connect with God? Is it necessary that they take shelter of the Bhagavatam in the same way if they're not as inclined towards philosophy? And how should they engage with the Bhagavatam if they're not so interested in philosophy?
It's a great point. And the verse that comes to mind is Tanamarupa Charitari Sukirtanani, that there's this very sweet taste to the Bhagavatam. So it's not like reading like a science textbook, or a philosophy textbook, in that if you're reading it, then you'll eventually develop a taste, especially if as we'll read in this chapter, if you perform some service to a great soul, then automatically there's this Vasudev Kata Ruchi, where you get this ruchi or this taste for the Bhagavatam. And so by engaging in Krishna consciousness, that I think that's why Prabhupada harps on this point so much, that anybody can become a Brahmana, basically. Because as you develop that taste for Krishna consciousness, then naturally you adopt all these processes that the Brahmanas adopt, like meditation and hearing, from scripture, and you become self-controlled and so forth, because that's just a natural result of the taste that comes from practicing Krishna consciousness, especially from serving great souls. And so I wouldn't say anyone's out of luck, because as one develops that taste, and one naturally becomes inclined towards those kinds of things. But I'll say I wouldn't even say that it is more difficult for somebody who's not philosophically inclined. I think a lot of the times it's actually easier, because whereas somebody who is philosophically inclined might say, okay, well, by my prowess, by my mental strength, I will, read through the Bhagavatam, go very deep, and as a result, I'll become, advanced and so forth. Somebody who maybe doesn't have that same inclination may be more inclined to do things like washing the dishes, and serving, some soul. And as a result, they'll get even more of a taste for reading the Bhagavatam than somebody who, had that inclination from the beginning. And so Krishna consciousness is a very kind of paradoxical process in that sense, in that the people who you would think would become very, advanced very quickly, oftentimes harbor a kind of resistance to a service attitude because of their material qualifications. And as a result, it takes them longer to develop that taste. Where somebody who's humble and sincere, the sincere inquirer, will develop that taste a lot faster and advance much quicker. And as a result, they'll become naturally inclined towards reading the Bhagavatam and other scriptures, stuff like that. So for somebody who's not super inclined, I'd say the trick is to do some Mahat Sevaya, do some service to a great soul, and you'll see, people will see how naturally you get into this stuff, And on the other side, even somebody who is really philosophical, you could see how they'll lose taste for reading the Bhagavatam if they commit some offense, or if they're not careful in the way that they deal with those great souls or with other devotees. If that makes sense.
Yeah, so what I'm kind of hearing is that our external designations kind of, anyway, when we take to devotional service, they all sort of kind of melt away in the matter of performing devotional service. So now to personalize this conversation a little bit, you and I both went to a 10-hour-long seminar about how your sort of material psychophysical nature does not go away when you take to devotional service. Yeah. So I'm trying to like reconcile the idea that, just like everyone who does devotional service kind of becomes Brahminical naturally with like no, like some people really are just in the field of resources, and some people really are in the field of artistry, and we have to engage them according to their propensity.
Yeah, so I don't think like what Prabhupada means when he says everyone becomes a brahmana is that like everybody give like if somebody is like a businessman and they become, they become like less inclined towards their business and they decide they just want to like they want to become a priest or something. They may still ha be able to operate their business efficiently and have, a desire to do that out of a sense of duty, but at the same time they're most interested and most inclined towards just hearing the Bhagavatam and chanting, meditating, worshiping the deity. So it's a brahmana, you become a brahmana in the sense that you become a Vaishnav, right? In that all Vaishnavas are brahmanas in that sense because they've developed these certain qualities, but not all brahmanas are Vaishnavas. And so I think there's a separation between like the Brahmana as like the person who's naturally inclined towards study and pensiveness and so forth, and the Vaishnav Brahmana, somebody who as a result of developing this taste, this ruchi, they become inclined towards um, hearing the Bhagavatam and chanting and worshiping the deity and so forth. So I don't think the two are necessarily mutually exclusive. I think it's possible that somebody could be technically a Vaishya, I guess you could say, or technically a Kshatriya, but also um, their heart's essential inclination isn't towards, studying science, or performing rituals necessarily, but towards hearing and chanting, which are kind of the underpinnings of that Brahminical nature, I would say, or that Brahminical occupation is actually spiritual progress, but it manifests in kind of more materialistic ways nowadays that we see in like the field of science or research or philosophy and stuff. So I think in one sense there's almost like a pure seed, for each class, but it kind of manifests in different ways according to how materialistic a person might be versus how spiritual they are, how inclined towards spirituality. It's a big topic and it is kind of confusing actually. And I've asked Mother Irmela some hard questions from time to time. She gives class at the Bhakti Center on this Bhakti Center Zoom Bhagavatam class once or twice a month, and I've brought up some questions I've had towards her to her. And yeah, it's kind of a technical thing, I think, at the end of the day. But in terms of practical application, I would say there's no need to like give up one's perceived, nature for the sake of being a Vaishnava Brahmana. Just like Prabhupada didn't like once he took initiation, say like, okay, I'm not going to be a businessman anymore. I'm not going to sell drugs, pharmaceuticals anymore. I'm gonna like, just focus on hearing and chanting. So I think there's like an underpinning that exists as a Vaishnav, as a Vaishnav Brahmana, so called, where they could still be performing their duties as whatever their swabhav might be, as a Kshatriya or a Vaishya or Shudra, whatever it might be. But yeah, it's a technical point, but an important one for sure.
All right. Well, thank you for the discussion, Prabhu.